Wonderful. Welcome, everyone, to the first Fridays for February 2023. I am thrilled and so honored to introduce our guest speaker today, Dr. Iman At-Taras at Cal Poly Pomona. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Animal and Veterinary Sciences at Cal Poly Pomona. And we will start, as we always do, with a little bit of sharing about Dr. At-Taras, your academic journey before we get into our topic today, which is preparing and applying for your teaching statements for a faculty physician at a CSU. So thank you so much, Dr. At-Taras. Would you share your talk a little bit about your journey, how you came to be a professor at Cal Poly Pomona?
Thank you, Dr. Young. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to all of those who are here with us and those who will listen to the recording. I'm so happy that we got a chance to connect at SSR this past summer. So again, as Dr. Young mentioned, my name is Iman At-Taras. I hail from many places. I've kind of been in different places. So I grew up in Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. Anyone here ever heard of Champaign-Urbana? Just shout out to Champaign-Urbana. That's kind of my childhood home. I'm a first-generation American. My parents immigrated here from Sudan, which is in East Africa. And I'll get to my academic kind of journey as well. But I feel a lot of who I am and where I came from and where I spent time and those who are around me helped me reach where I am today. I'd like to acknowledge my family, my parents who supported me so much in this journey, my husband, my children. From Illinois, I actually decided to travel abroad for my bachelor's degree. And I decided that I wanted a different experience after having gone to school in the Midwest. I traveled to Sudan, which is my parents' home country. It was a very exciting and interesting experience, very enriching in terms of learning about life and about people. And I did my bachelor's degree in animal science with an agriculture as a major and emphasis in animal science. And at that time, and in the place that I attended, I didn't really have an opportunity to work outside of academia, but I did get the opportunity to kind of assist in some of the laboratories for some of the professors who were teaching us. Decided to come back and continue for my master's degree. So my master's, I was at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, so kind of back in my home state. And I did more research in terms of animal management, specifically reproductive management in dairy cattle. Love dairy cows a lot. So I got to work on the estrus cycle, behavioral aspects as well as investigating hormones in cattle. At that time, I connected with one of my kind of academic and spiritual mentors, Dr. Janice Barr. And, Dr. Young will recognize the name, reproductive physiologist. She's, one of the very early mentors that I had at U of I, Urbana-Champaign. I remember, enrolling in her class and taking her radioimmunoassay course and all that I learned and had yet to learn. So from there, I came out to California also through knowing Dr. Barr. She referred me to mentors that were out here. So I came out to Davis in the northern part of the state. And I did my PhD at UC Davis in the area of reproductive and endocrine physiology. And at the time when I kind of hit the ground on Davis, we had two different labs that were discussing potentially the role of estrogen in male reproductive behavior and to kind of just set, or not behavior, but in reproductive development and function in the male. And at that time, one of the other reproductive physiologists from University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, he was at the vet school out there, Rex Hess, had published papers on the role of estrogen in the epididymis. And I apologize to those of you who maybe aren't in the area of reproductive physiology. I get really excited about hormones and reproduction, but we wanted to learn more about, like, okay, what is estrogen doing in males and how is it affecting development? So my advisor was Jan Roser, who did a lot of equine work. So between Jan Roser and Dr. Trish Berger, who does a lot of reproduction work in swine, we were able to, and I was honored and happy and got the experience of like writing a USDA grant as a PhD student. It was exciting. We went through the process, sent it in the first year, got rejected, revised, got more preliminary data, sent it in again, and it was funded. And from there, I was just hooked. I was just like, okay, the research. And I know that all of you all are, in PhD programs right now. It's a journey, right? Up and down. But I think some of the most important things that I learned from that journey was that the people I connected with, opened doors for us. And help influence the way that we go, and even bouncing ideas off of them. So I think mentorship is one thing that I kind of really valued, especially during my PhD program going forward. I did some part-time teaching for a bit at Sac State, so CSU up in Sacramento. I taught human reproductive biology for a while. And then between then and coming back to Cal Poly Pomona is a long story. I had 4 kids in the process, the oldest of whom is now 23. She's doing a post-bac right now, wants to go to medical school. I have one who just moved out to Texas. She's 22. She's got a job out in Austin. And then I've got one who's at community college. And then I've got one who's keeping me going. She's in 4th grade. So that's kind of a little bit about my personal life. I am very excited and motivated about kind of talking to other folks in the sciences, but in academia in general. And I feel like everyone brings something that is unique and special to them, their own kind of point of view. And I love just kind of connecting with people. So at some point, my family and I traveled abroad. I taught overseas in Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. So raise your hand if you know kind of where that is or what it's like. So out in the Middle East, Riyadh is a desert, but it's very urban and very international. I spent over 10 years teaching there, and then I decided it was just time to come back to California, time to come back to the States. My children were older. I applied to different places. And then I, finally found my place here at Cal Poly Pomona. So I'm very excited to be here. This is my 4th year now at Cal Poly Pomona in the Department of Animal and Veterinary Sciences as part of the College of Agriculture. I teach quite a bit. I try to do a bit of research. And I also mentor students, mainly undergrads. I do have currently 2 master's students as well in my lab. So I'm going to cut it short because I don't want to talk too much. And then just, if we could have any questions that you want to specifically ask about Dr. Young or anyone else.
No, that's fantastic. I love your journey. We always ask our guests to share, because I think it's important to see how many pathways can lead to the CSU, right? I think that that's very, very valuable to hear, that there's not one set way that you must, something that, okay, I must do this, like a checklist to get to the CSU. Rather, you can forge your own path. So thank you for sharing. But let's get into our topic, which is really thinking about teaching at a CSU and how we might prepare those teaching statements. And before we do, you've been to lots of different places and you've done lots of different teaching. So can you let us know, I think for those of us on the call who maybe haven't had that experience going, teaching in multiple different places, just when you were a grad student and then when you were a postdoc, did you do some TAing? Did you do some teaching at that time? And was that helpful to prepare you like for your time in Saudi Arabia, like for teaching or at Cal Poly Pomona?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to be able to teach as an undergrad student. I assisted And shortly after I graduated abroad at University of Khartoum in Sudan. And at that time, one of my favorite professors had a dairy science lab. So it was a little bit different than what I was doing, but I learned to, some of the procedures and assisted him in the labs. And I think that was my very first experience, kind of like with college teaching. I was a senior, and then after that, I stayed on for a few months as like a post-grad assistant, teaching assistant for a bit. So that was my first experience in Illinois. As doing my master's degree, I also had an opportunity to kind of teach one of those advising courses. So I think some of what we can offer other students, even before we become, official instructors on record, is from our experience in our departments. We can do courses where we advise students. So like kind of peer mentorship and advising maybe is helpful as well. If you're not at a point where you're able to kind of take on a course, then I think peer mentoring and advising is a good way. So I did some of that as part of an official course that we had in Illinois. And then raise your hand if some of you have, as part of your PhD requirement, you have to do teaching, because that's what I went through actually at Davis. So part of, yeah, good. I'm seeing some hands, right? So part of what was required for me at Davis was to, teach at least 2 different semesters. I did more than that just because I enjoyed the teaching, and because, I had role models and professors who, kind of helped me engage with the students. So I would also substitute for them once in a while. So I was doing TA. If the professor wasn't there, I was substituting. I was holding discussion sessions or, office hours. And all of that helped, I think, prepare me for my job now here at Cal Poly Pomona. All those interactions with the students and, trying to kind of not just understand my field and know the knowledge, but also understand the individuals, the people that we're dealing with in terms of the different students that I was engaged with. So I did teach. I was able to teach throughout, or had opportunities to teach, and I was very fortunate. And I mentioned that I had spent some time abroad. So also that was mainly a teaching position. So I didn't travel or go through the route, that where I had a postdoc. My postdoc years were mainly spent teaching. So I was teaching in a pre-health sciences curriculum. And I got a lot of experience in terms of teaching, got to work with multinational and international staff and faculty also at the universities where I was at. And I think that helped me also reflect on pedagogies and approaches to teaching.
I think that's great to have so much experience coming in. I know that's not necessarily available to everybody per se, you sought this out. Were there any training courses in teaching? Did they specifically have you do a training course, or was it just more of like, okay, here's your assignment, now go start teaching?
So there was a teaching resource center that I remember now at U of I, University of Illinois, that we were given access to. So it wasn't necessarily like you were required to take teacher training at the time when I went through the program, but I did enlist in some workshops to help me, with teaching and kind of, I remember even getting help with my teaching statement there. And I was a master's student at the time. So I think most universities have a teaching resource group or teaching resource center where you can reach out. And that's what I did. But it wasn't something that was required formally.
So I think it seems like now there's more of that. I think now we're more aware, we're being more mindful about our practice. We're calling it a practice rather than just throwing, hopefully that's experience that people here on our call are having, that there is a little bit more going into that. And so from what I'm hearing, it like maybe from you is reach out to, would you suggest reaching out to even if it's not being offered, reaching out to teaching centers on the campus, particularly if you are interested in coming back to a CSU? It may not be required, but maybe this is something that you would suggest our fellows doing.
For sure. Yeah, definitely agree with you, Dr. Young, that if you are kind of required to do it, that's great. If you're not, reach out and do it, because even in research, and even if you decide, okay, I'm going to be focused mainly on research, you need to teach what you know, right? A lot of us have run into at some point into great researchers or great people, but there's always an issue because you have to teach, right? So how do you communicate your knowledge? How do you give access to, students to what you know? How do you help them? And I think definitely part of that process is developing as a teacher intentionally to think about how we communicate, what we do in the classroom. So yeah, reach out to the Teaching Resource Center. Here at Cal Poly Pomona, they're great. They're known as the Center for Advancement of Faculty and something. They're cafe for short, but they're our go-to people. So they have wonderful resources, I'm happy to say. We've come a long way, that's for sure.
Oh, totally. I agree. I think, and one other thing I think that would be of note for our CDEP fellows, since you have a CSU connection, check in with your own graduate institution, I think, with their teaching center, see what you have on offer there. But you also can come back, through your CSU mentor and see what the teaching centers and the resources are at your CSU, because they are really well developed in our system. And we do place a lot of emphasis on that. So I like this idea of like reaching out and seeing like, hey, is our course, can I get certified in this? Can I get some training? That definitely looks good on your application. But let's talk about that application. Can we talk a little bit about, so part of a job application for a CSU is to create, you have to supply, you basically put in a packet. And there's a teaching statement, which we'll talk about today. Next month, the research statement. There's usually a diversity and inclusion statement. So we'll be talking about those in First Fridays in the next few months. But today, that teaching statement, this is a key piece where you really talk about your teaching philosophy. You talk about your plans. Any thoughts on this statement that you want to share with our fellows, particularly again thinking about coming to a CSU and what we might be looking for?
Yeah, so as Dr. Young mentioned, like the teaching statement, the diversity statement, and a statement of research, right? These are statements that we have to write, that we should reflect on, and that should kind of, someone reading our statement should be able to kind of visualize us basically in the classroom. So I would advise like to just sit and reflect, and as Dr. Young did earlier before we started, just kind of ground ourselves and think about what is important to us as it pertains to teaching and learning. And we learn in terms of our experience in teaching, but we also kind of have some insight into teaching from us being students, right? And we've all been students for so long, like, right, starting in preschool, middle school, elementary school, all the way now through our doctoral state. Being a student and reflecting on being a student, I think, is the first step to really understanding what's valuable for teaching, because students are kind of on the receiving end. So reflecting on our experience as students, I think, is really important. How did we feel in the classroom? When was a time that we felt comfortable, included? It was a brave space where we could share versus, and what about that classroom made us feel like that? What did the teacher do, right? What did the instructor do that made us feel included, that made us feel brave, that opened our minds to learning, that made us, forget about all the problems and issues and just focus on like endocrinology or hormones or, chemistry, whatever it is that we're into, right? So reflecting on our experience as students, I think, is really valuable. And then, of course, if you have some teaching experience, that's always a big plus. And like with teaching, we always have to kind of reflect and think about where we're going with teaching. I don't know that you ever get to like, the mountain and you're up there and you know everything. We're always learning. And the other thing is to open our minds to how the world is changing so much. So somebody like me who came back from when I was doing my master's or when I was in high school, I'm dating myself. We were doing a class called keyboarding, right? Like learning about computers and what to do on computers, and computers were just out, and that's how old I am. But and now you really can't do anything without computers. You can't do anything without like your iPhones. And so I think also reflecting on how things are changing and keeping ourselves updated. So I would talk about what to you is a good classroom that is conducive to learning, by reflecting on your experience as a student, by reflecting on any experience that you've had in terms of teaching, and talk about those qualities and why they're valuable to you, and talk about like actual situations that may have come up in the classroom, whether you are a student and a teacher, and what kind of lessons you walked away. Reflect on the student population, right? So if you're going to apply to Cal Poly Pomona or CSU Long Beach, wherever you're going, look at the student population. Who are you going to be teaching in your department, right? Address that. How are you going to, what do you have that you're going to put forth to help engage these students, and speak to that, and speak to your previous experience and your qualifications and your strength. What are you going to bring to this classroom, right? To the students that you're teaching. So I think just sitting and getting a moment to reflect on the learning process, how different students learn, what you've been through, and just bringing that together, and being very specific when you talk in your teaching statement, or even your diverse, your statement of diversity and inclusion, being very specific. Give real life examples. If you can't come up with an example, maybe someone who's been through a situation and your take on that. Like when I'm reading a statement, I've been on a few search committees, I'm looking for the person, like genuinely. You don't have to know everything about teaching. You don't have to know everything about, nobody knows everything about everything, but you do have to be willing to learn. I want to see reflection on self-development. How are you developing skills? How do you continue to develop skills to be a teacher or an instructor, right? So I'm looking for someone who's genuinely in the statement that they're making. And sometimes what we'll do is like, I'll look at, you're speaking to your experience at whichever university you're at, and I'm looking at your CV as well. So just being true to yourself and putting yourself out on that piece of paper, I think speaks a lot. And it draws the search committee's attention on your application versus maybe someone who's being very abstract and being very general with their statement. I'm going to stop because I may be talking too much and let Dr. Young kind of guide the discussion.
No, this is awesome. There's so many goodies in what you're saying. I'm like, oh, I like that. I like this. So I'm hearing a couple of things, and maybe we can explore some of them too. So something I pulled out. So I actually have a lot of things here, but I love this idea of, before you're sitting down and writing your teaching statement, or for many of you, maybe you have a teaching philosophy or teaching statement. So before you revamp it, to center yourself and think about your own experience as a student is such a cool idea, because I think we sort of approach these things as like, okay, got to get this done. I have to, have this very professional thing. And yeah, you do, but that stop and reflection on like, okay, as a student, what worked for what made my heart sing, when I was in a classroom, what put me in that flow zone where I was just into it. Like you said, I love it. Like it was just hormones and I was so excited. Whenever you can get that place where whatever it was that really got you hooked. And I was almost thinking of coming up with a couple of key words. So as you were talking, I thought, oh, I'm picturing like these key words of like things that are important to me in the classroom, and almost basing my statement from that, like kind of structuring it around me is like, okay, I want engagement, and this approachability or thing, these are words that I'm kind of thinking of. So I love that. You also mentioned, and maybe we could dive in a little bit more about that. And this has come up before when we talked about interviewing at a CSU, but here this is writing the teaching statement, real life examples. So not just this bland, I enjoy working with students, teaching is important to me, that which is, but bringing in these real life examples. And I think we've all heard that, like, okay, put in examples. But what you said was examples of real teaching, but with reflection and change. That really stood out to me, because on a hiring committee, I would definitely be like, okay, cool. This person is now not only looking at doing this pedagogy, but then reflecting and changing on it. Can we dive into that a little bit more? What might you want to see being on a hiring committee or reading the teaching statements, or any advice you can give on what kind of change? Because sometimes I know, like, I've tried things, I'm like, oh, that's bad. Like, that did not work at all. It was a horrible idea. Yeah. And now I have like all these posters of seminiferous tubules or whatever. And it just bombed. Like, it did not work. We talk about, like, what's the balance there? Because there's other things where I was like, oh, I tried this, it didn't, it didn't work, and then I changed it. Any thoughts on that reflection and change piece that our fellows could put in their statement?
Yeah, I think one thing that speaks true, we have to think about, like, we're in the business of education, right? Who are our customers? Our customers are our students. We have to give them, or we have to facilitate. We don't give, right? It's like an interchange. We take and we give, but how can we facilitate learning in our classrooms where we have the responsibility, right, to make sure that folks are learning? And I think it's a lot of what's helped me reflect on how I can change as an instructor is feedback that I get from my students. They can speak directly to what the issues are more than I can. I have also had, like, peer evaluators. My colleagues will sit in and actually we'll maybe get to it, but part of the process when you're at CSU is you're also evaluated by your peers. But I think the student reflection is important. So I try to, in the first day of class, say, what are some things, like, for example, that I can do in this class to facilitate learning? And I'll have them write it, like, on their little, I make out name plates for everybody. Takes time. It takes me a couple of weeks to usually get everybody's name. But I think I want to know everybody's name in the classroom. So far, I haven't had a class that was too big for that. It takes me longer. My brain is still kind of, it's a challenge for me each semester, but I'll have students give me kind of clues as to what it is that will help their learning. So I'll see things like, I'm a visual learner, or I learn things by doing. And so I will actually read that reply and say, okay, here's what I'm going to do to kind of make this very abstract topic of, like, steroid hormones and what they look like and how they function, their mechanism of action. How am I going to make this something that, folks can be interested in, maybe, and engaged with, and so on. So I think a lot of how I change what I, in terms of instruction is just getting feedback from my students and trying to think about what are ways I can change that. The other thing is I get together, and you mentioned, Dr. Young, about, like, you try doing things and they don't work out so well, and that's okay. We learn from them. I also try to attend. We have, like, on a weekly basis, faculty meetings that have to, again, organized by our teaching resource center. I try to pop in, they're on Zoom, and just, like, throw out an idea and get feedback from others who've done this. And usually I'll find someone who's got a really good idea for whatever situation I'm experiencing at the time. So just getting feedback from students and other instructors, I think, has helped me a lot in terms of changes that I need to make. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question.
No,
I can talk more, but I don't want to.
No, it does. I mean, and I also, I'm thinking, as you're saying, you reach out to, so you're getting student feedback. So I think these would be important things for me reading a teaching statement on a hiring committee. I would love to see that an applicant was soliciting and responding to student perceptions, evaluations, not even necessarily the formal ones, but like I throw out a mid-semester eval for myself, and I collected, I asked very targeted questions. And then I can respond to it. So I would love to see somebody who did that. As well as you said, you reach out and you go to the Zoom group. I'd put that in my statement too. I would say, even if it's not something you're like, I don't have that at my university. Maybe this is where you get, go on our chat and get some CDIP fellows or other people who may want to talk about teaching and have and establish a share group. And I think that would be great too. Then I could basically, I think on the hiring committee, you're like, okay, is this person being thoughtful about teaching? Is this person being, caring about this as a craft? Because we do at the CSU, right? We do care about it as a craft. One last thing that you had brought up from the previous statement was also something that I want to emphasize to this group, which is you said, please make sure you are targeting your statement that to the CSU you're applying to and the students there. Because I have read applications, teaching statements where they basically will say, I could teach this every quarter. We're on semester. It's a little thing, but it's like, come on. Or we actually had, because again, I'm in biology. I would love teaching this at your medical school. Well, we're not a medical, so not that you all would make that mistake, but just targeting it. Anytime I see somebody say, oh, I noticed that you have this program for students at Cal State Long Beach, or you support students you have a writing center at Cal State Long Beach, and they name it by what it is. Those little details, doing your homework like that and throwing little bits like that into your teaching statement, to me, that scores big points. I don't know. Do you agree? Is that?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For sure. It shows that you care about the institution, and the search committee wants to see that, right? That you cared enough to look into what is going on in this program or in this department. Yeah, I mean, you have to do the homework, right? Research, find out, and maybe a different CSU, different student population. The program may be different. So yeah, for sure. If you can like customize your statement just a little bit, in terms of, referencing that specific university, of course. Yeah, that's a good point.
And the little bit's a good point too. So having it where, you can find and replace. Mm-hmm. So, most universities would have a writing center or would have this. So it would be targeting, you don't have to change and make a completely unique teaching statement for every single place you apply, but doing that little homework, doing selective find and replace, I think can really be an effective thing. That also doesn't mean that you're starting file new for every single job application, because that would not be great. Can we move on to a little bit about a couple of things, because I want to leave time for questions as well. But as a Cal Poly Pomona professor, how important do you think teaching is to your department, to your college? Is this something that they put a lot of emphasis on in terms of the quality of your teaching when we're thinking about like reappointment and tenure and promotion? Is this important?
Yeah, I mean, our Cal Poly Pomona does a really good job from day one, again, because we've got this really amazing cafe, which kind of from day one orient us. Hey, you got to get on the RTP. So it is reappointment, tenure, and promotion, right? And so in the first couple of weeks, our chairs in the departments give us access to the departmental RTP document, which is basically a contract that says if you do this, 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 and this, you will be retained, you will be tenured, you will be promoted, right? And each department's going to be a little bit different. So you're going to be assessed based on your departmental document. And they do a really good job of making sure you know that from day one, that you're here. Yes, you're wonderful. This is academia. Make sure you get these things done. right? Because those are the technical things that need to be done. At Cal Poly Pomona in general, and specifically for our department, teaching is crucial. So we have 3 components that we are assessed on or evaluated on every year. When we come back in September, we submit this document. Thankfully, it's online. It's been online since I've been here. Apparently before it was like a huge stack of paper that had to, go from you to your department, to your dean, and so on. But teaching's at the top. So teaching, research and creative activity, and then service, right? So I remember teaching was like, you start new and you have new courses, and it may be that you haven't taught these specific courses before. You may have sat in them as a student. So preparation for teaching really does take a lot of time, I think, in the first year or 2. And sometimes you'll find that you get different courses thrown at you, right? Because there are maybe a certain number of faculty. Some faculty like to teach specific courses. And even though, like when I got here, I was eyeballing the endocrine course, endocrine and repo, I'm like, I need to be teaching that course. But hey, I was giving food animal production. I'm like, but regardless, I had to work my way up. So teaching is important, and being intentional about interacting and facilitating a good learning environment is important, whether or not you're teaching the course that you really want to be teaching, right? So all of us may have other courses that may not be specifically what we get very, very excited about, but we do need to teach. So for us at Cal Poly Pomona, it's a big thing. We are an undergraduate, like many of the CSUs, or an undergraduate serving institution. We do in our department have a master's degree. It's actually at the level of the College of Agriculture. And then you have an emphasis. For example, we're in the animal science department, so we have students who are emphasizing or taking the animal science option. So teaching is extremely important. We are evaluated each semester in 2 separate courses by our peers. That peer will be like, for example, I'm an assistant professor, so it could be another assistant professor. More likely, it might be an associate professor or a full professor. It just depends on the dynamics of the department. So twice a year, we're evaluated in 2 different courses that we're teaching, but our student evaluations are like the gold standard. Like we have to have student evaluations for every single course, every single section in the semesters that we're teaching, with the exception of the summer. And we actually get the cumulative feedback, all the feedback from all the courses after final exams have ended. We've usually started the second semester sometime in the break between the semesters. We get those. When we come back in the fall and we reflect, we actually have to go through and do analysis of the student feedback and address, if there is a place in teaching that we're not doing properly. We actually have to think about it, reflect on it, talk about how we're planning to change, to change our teaching or to change the classroom, what we're going to do about it. What are our plans? What have we done? So teaching is extremely important, I think, in CSU overall, but I think at Cal Poly Pomona, very much so.
That's great. And that's the same across most of our CSUs as well. We really do value quality teaching and are assessed on it. And I know this is a discussion for later, but really I wanted to bring it in today because it reflects on this idea of applying for a job at a CSU. You're going to have to put time into the statement about teaching, but it doesn't end there. I guess that was my thought of making sure we covered it today. It's not empty words that you're writing. It is truly something that ideally that statement, how you feel about it in your practice, will continue on. And it is something that is valued by your department, your college, your colleagues, as you go through and up through tenure and full professor. And just as a recap, so your assistant, when you're hired, 3 years at a CSU can be reappointed. Tenure is at year 6, then you move to an associate professor, and then 6 more years to full, which is then you have, that's the pathway. Sometimes we use these terms and it's like, wait, what happened? But that's how we do it at a CSU. system. So in the last few minutes here, I think we've talked a little bit about things, you must do and how you're evaluated. To me, there's so much joy in being able to teach at a CSU. It is truly, it fills me up. So can you share, I'm not putting you on the spot because I know you feel this way. So, but can you share a little bit about the perks, the good side, the positives of working with your Cal Poly Pomona students?
My students are amazing. Our students are incredible. Everybody has a day when they just don't want to come to work. And I have my share of those days. And then I remember my students and I'm like, I got to get up and get to the classroom and get to campus, because I have to be honest and say it's the students who motivate me the most. They're incredible. You're just thinking about the different students. I love our student population. They're so responsible. They're hard workers. They're just, folks go through so much outside of the classroom, and to have, to bring all of that and just kind of come to class and sit and listen to me talk at them. I thank them. I say, thank you for coming to class. It's an 8 o'clock lab on a Monday morning. We're going to be here for 3 hours. Everybody's commuting. People haven't had breakfast or coffee, and they're still there, right? And so I think what motivates me most about my job is the students, I gotta say. It's amazing. And I'm sure all the CSUs are like this, but I love being here at Cal Poly Pomona for that reason. It keeps me going. It really does.
Spoken from my own heart. Yes. I feel that is true. It's not easy work, but it's just the most rewarding. And I feel so lucky every day to get to do this. So let's open it up for questions if anybody has questions. And I also want to point your attention to a new sign-in on our Canvas page. The Chancellor's Office changed the sign-in. So this recording and the top tips will be there, as well as some resources. I'll post some resources on that I like about writing a teaching philosophy and the teaching statement. So any questions from the group? Anything coming up? You can put it in the chat or feel free to go ahead and unmute.
I have a question. Thank you so much for coming. I'm a lecturer at Cal Poly Pomona. Go Broncos! So it's always nice to see another Bronco. Can you talk about how you transitioned to Cal Poly Pomona from your previous position, and how that transition was for you? Was it a culture shock? Did it take you, some time to get used to the Cal Poly Pomona way? I know we spend a lot of time talking about how do we prepare to get the job, but I think sometimes the culture of the campus and all those things are important, as well. So I just want to know if you would speak a little bit about that.
Oh, thank you so much, Shanika. I was trying to find you because I saw earlier, I saw your name and I saw Cal Poly Pomona. I'm like, I got to find that out. So you're right there. It's different, isn't it? The culture for each campus is different. I mentioned that I did part-time teaching up at Sac State, Sacramento. Different campus, different cultures. So I think, yes, an important part of, kind of getting settled in is not just to get the job, but just kind of finding your space. I think one thing that helped me, and I'm still working on this when I got here, is that we had these faculty affinity groups. And I don't know, Shanika, if you were, when you started teaching, if Victoria and her group, if you were able to get into these affinity groups. So at the time I started 4 years ago, I was kind of teamed up with other new faculty from different colleges, and we got to kind of meet up for coffee and discuss things. And so that was helpful to kind of connect with other new faculty. I think though, in terms, and then gradually, it's not like I still keep in touch with them, but then gradually you're drawn into your position, you're teaching your department. I think one really important thing is to find a mentor. someone who's been there a few years. I think that is so helpful. You know, and they could be, you know, mentoring in terms of just like finding out the system, how things are done. Ideally, you want to look for someone in your own department, but sometimes we don't have that many people, but just anyone that you can kind of connect with and talk to in terms of finding things out. I'm sure you all have felt COVID and what it's done to us, right, on our various campuses. So like I was here for a semester, second semester, we're all like told to get off campus. And then it was 2 years of COVID. So when we came back last spring or fall, I felt like I was just coming to the campus for the first time. But I think reaching out to different faculty and colleagues and just kind of establishing a connection, making an effort to go out for coffee in the middle of the busy day or have a quick lunch or something can be really helpful. But yes, the culture, it takes time. I spent time in Northern California. 14 years I was up there, Davis, Sacramento. I got family in the Bay Area. Southern Sacramento is different. Cal Poly is different. And I don't think I felt really at home until sometime in my third year here. So it took me a while.
I think it can take a while. And plus you're hustling. Like, I think those first 2 years kind of are a blur. And it's funny because everybody says, well, I am doing so much as a grad student or as a postdoc right now. It'll be fine. I'm like, it's a little different. I don't know. Our May first Friday is how to transition to a tenure track position. So that's our whole focus, is like making that switch. So very nice lead in here. It's like a teaser trailer for May's session, which is great. So, but I agree, reaching out, and most CSUs now, because I know that I'm working with the people at their faculty centers, that they do have, like Victoria, I know. So like they do have these programs to bring, when you are coming in, to bring in those first year faculty members and give you a space, give you a cohort to work with. Any other questions? I have one that came in here about just the teaching we had covered interviews in the past, but did you have to do a teaching demonstration during your interview? Is that something that people should be prepared for? And what do they give you a prompt or just say, do some teaching?
Yeah, they actually do. They, at least for when I interviewed here, they gave me the name of a course, and then they just kind of let me choose a topic. So if they do that, it's kind of nice, because then you can choose something related to your research, put your research twist on it. And it's really helpful. So I did do a 30-minute teaching presentation and a 30-minute research presentation as well. And they had, and even after I started here, I've been on 2 different search committees, and the candidates that we brought in also had to do the same. So there are students potentially who are going to be there who may or may not ask questions. So think about or reflect on the topic that you're given, or if you're free to choose something that you're comfortable with, and then prepare, your slides. Be prepared for questions like, I remember I was asked, okay, how would you give an assignment or quiz like an upper division versus a lower division? So be oriented as to, okay, there are courses that are lower division courses. I might have a lot of students. What am I going to cover in what depth? Versus, an upper division course. And we can reflect also on our experience, right, as undergrad students, and how that was like. So think about also, if you haven't already been teaching, what kind of assignments you might give to students, right, within, different levels, upper division versus lower division. I think that was something that I remember coming up. But yeah, I think a normal part of the interview process for at least some of the CSUs is to do a teaching session.
We're doing that now. And just to give a different perspective here, we're asking people where you're saying, teach on this, like give a 20-minute lecture on, and we're saying like transcription. One thing I've noted as people are coming through, the really successful candidates have selected something very They didn't have to cover the whole thing. We never said you had to cover the whole thing. They said, oh, last class, we covered this as a review. And then they did their little section. And then they said, now next time we're going to finish. That's my top tip for that, because the people who thought, okay, I have to cover this whole big topic, and you can imagine anything in your discipline that could be massive, be selective and just do a bang up job with that. And the other tip I have is you're mentioning, like, what would you do for upper division, lower division? Provide a syllabus. If you have the wherewithal to put that in your application. If they say, we are really interested in you teaching X course, and you have something kind of ready, change the course name, put it to their course name, and it's a little bonus. It's a little extra touch that you might consider.
That's smart. I didn't do that, but that's definitely smart. Yeah.
It's again, and you could save these for like, we apply. The academic job market is rough. So we often apply, to multiple jobs. So you could do these bonus parts for the jobs that you really want. The ones that you're like, this thing's to me, this is something that I really love. We can do just one more question. If we have anything, or if there's any last thought, anything that's bubbled up that we should add for our fellows. I don't know.
I did want to add one thing for the teaching statement or your teaching philosophy. So part of the RTP process, actually, when we reflect on teaching, feedback from students and from peers, we actually usually start off with our teaching philosophy, which is like your teaching statement. And so every year we're actually reflecting on that and making changes to it based on, that year's experience. So the teaching statement is really important, or your teaching philosophy, because you kind of carry it with you throughout your career here at CSU.
Such a great point. Yeah, you're not writing something that is just going to be like, you're never going to use again. In fact, because I mentor our first year faculty, and I say, go back to what you submitted when you applied for this job. Let's start there, copy and paste that teaching statement. And that's the start of your narrative for your tenure, and that exactly. I mean, it gets updated. I love that. It also helps, I think, for me, knowing that something I'm writing will be repurposed and this is going to be something that will be reused. It helps me write it because I know it's not something that's going to be a one and done. This is something that will follow through, in addition to being something that we're, our teaching is important and really reflecting on it. So, well, with that, I need to close today just because I need to move on to help out a colleague. But wow, I think I wrote down all these tips, I'm going to tell people these tips. So I think this was so useful. And I am so grateful for you sharing your expertise and your wisdom and your time with our fellows. So thank you so much for being here. And if fellows have questions, feel free, of course, to email me, and perhaps they can look you up, Dr. Taras. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you.
Everybody, have an awesome day. Bye.
Bye.